Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 26 of the Let's Talk Yoga podcast. I hope you're doing well. I wanted to share a couple of exciting updates with you before today's interview. Starting February, I will be sharing more of my online yoga offerings in 2021, especially my virtual 300-hour yoga teacher training, as well as mini workshops and masterclasses in 2021. So if that's something you're interested in, just keep an eye out on this podcast, on our social platforms. And most importantly, if you aren't on my newsletter yet, make sure to jump onto that because that's where you get first dibs on everything. Okay. And you can find the link to sign up in our show notes or anywhere else where you tune in to listen to this podcast. Now, the second update is I'm going live for the first time in my Facebook group on February 1st. That's a Monday at 12 noon Pacific time. Come join me. I'll be polling for a few different topics that we can connect on. And it's going to be a fun little thing we do together. And that's happening on Facebook on the Let's Talk Yoga group. Now, coming to today's episode, my guest today needs absolutely no introduction. She wears many hats and is popularly known as the host of one of the best yoga podcasts that we have today. Andrea Ferretti and Yoga Land are common names in the yoga industry. For me, Andrea has been the queen of content creation in the yoga world. Since the early 2000s, she's worked at Yoga Journal. She's been a freelance writer. She's a podcaster. And recently, she's been course creating for yoga teachers, helping them navigate the world of content. So that just makes Andrea the perfect guest to talk about why yoga teachers need to pay attention to their content and why it's their superpower. And we get into things like free content versus paid content, the importance of an email list, and how much time to spend on social media content versus developing your own content and your own sales funnels, and a whole bunch of fun, according to me, fun aspects of content creation. I feel like you and me as yoga teachers, sometimes we just take content for granted. We don't really give it the attention it deserves. It can truly help us be successful as yoga teachers and make impact in the long run. So Andrea shares her wisdom beautifully, and I hope you get started if you haven't, and this inspires you and you continue to create impact and be highly successful doing it. Okay, enjoy your interview. I'll see you on the other side. Hi, my name is Arundhati, and you're listening to the Let's Talk Yoga podcast. I'm an ex-Bollywood dancer turned yoga and wellness educator. I've built a 6-figure business as an immigrant, woman of color yoga teacher with no business background, no handstands, pure instinct, and the free information found on Google. If you love doing yoga and you dream of teaching it someday, this podcast is for you. We go over everything from doing and teaching yoga to scaling a small business, living a modern yoga lifestyle, and so much more. You'll find interesting, fun, raw conversations along with some tips, tricks, strategies, and insights in this podcast. So grab your cup of chai and let's jump in. Hi, Andrea. Welcome to the show. I'm so excited that you're here.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I can't wait to talk to you today.
I've been wanting to do this ever since the podcast was a dream. And I know we got Jason on, but I've been waiting for this. For me, I've always considered you to be like the queen of yoga content. And you've got so much experience over the years in this. So you're like the perfect guest to talk to about all things content. I was wondering let's start right at the very beginning, right? What constitutes yoga content for yoga teachers?
Yeah. I mean, it sort of depends on how broadly you want to go. Jason is kind of at the point where he's been developing workshops and trainings and different events for so long that he would even sort of include those in his idea of creating content. So I just think of content as anything that educates and inspires the people who are your students or the people who are interested in you. If we want to get more nitty gritty, I think what's so beautiful for all of us right now. I mean, I think there's often this feeling, the sense that I get from yoga teachers of like, oh God, in addition to doing all my teaching and auditioning for my teaching roles and getting privates, I also have to create online content. Like, it's too much. But I want to just say that, when I started off in the early 2000s with really creating yoga content in earnest, the only way to do that was to get published by someone else. There was really not a viable way to self-publish. Like, blogs had just started. They really wasn't easy to create your own graphics. We certainly didn't have, the ability on iPhones that we do right now to create videos. So if we want to look at the nitty-gritty, try to look at it as the opportunities to create, obviously social media content, blogs or video logs, vlogs, on YouTube or IGTV. There's podcasting. And then there's now this kind of micro video option with things like Reel and TikTok and even just Instagram stories. And then, of course, I don't want to be remiss and leave out email newsletters, which are really what I think are just what yoga teachers should be focusing on the most in terms of being consistent with their content.
Mm-hmm. So there's a whole range of content that's available to teachers, right? From blogging to videos to courses and membership sites and stuff like that. But I'm really curious about understanding social media, like free content, versus, how much energy and effort someone needs to spend with paid content.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I really like to think of them as living within the same ecosystem. So there are people who successfully monetize their social media content. And that's just simply isn't my area of expertise. It's not that I don't think that's a worthwhile effort. It's not what I can speak to. But it is still worthwhile to create quote unquote free content, right? On your social media channels or on your blog, et cetera, if you are doing it intentionally. So if you are looking at your paid offerings, your subscription site or your workshops or your weekly classes, and you're saying to yourself, okay, how can I create content that best supports these paid offerings? How can I let people know? And it doesn't have to be overt, right? Certainly you want to have some posts or some things that directly say like, I'm teaching yoga for back pain on this date, et cetera, et cetera. But back out of it a little bit and take a more macro level view and say, okay, first, to get someone to come to this offering, what do they need to know about me? What do they need to know about how I approach this topic? What do they need to know about my expertise? And when you look at it from that perspective, you can then create free, in quotes, content that's drawing potential students in and introducing them to you and your approach, so that when you then promote the paid offering, they're like, oh, yeah, oh, cool. Well, I really enjoyed learning X, Y, and Z from her, but I want to go deeper. So I want to sign up for this. So in terms of the balance, it's like there's obviously no exact formula. It's going to be different for everyone depending on their time and their current income, right? If you're not if you're feeling like you're not making a solid income right now, I certainly wouldn't necessarily suggest, for example, starting a podcast. Because as we know, as podcasters, it is incredibly time intensive. And although it does introduce you to a big audience, it's not a huge, it's hard to monetize in and of itself. And I will say that as, going on 5 years of podcasting, it's still not a huge chunk of income for me at all. But when Jason and I look at the podcast as an opportunity to talk about the things that he's good at teaching, or to talk about the things I love about content, because I have a content creation course, and then we sort of funnel people toward those offerings, then the free content pays itself off, so to speak.
I think it's really important that you mentioned take the macro level approach. And essentially what you're saying is give people a preview of your full course, like give them a sampler and say like, hey, this is who I am. This is what I enjoy doing. And if you want to learn more, then come and check out my paid offering, which is like a really, really great approach. But there are so many yoga teachers I've met, Andrea, who haven't given content a second thought. They think of content as sequencing and teaching their classes and just that. So if someone is starting off today and getting started on this content journey, where should they begin? Should it be blogs, or it depends on their personality? I mean, I don't do a lot of video, but I know a bunch of people just love getting on video all the time. So where does someone start if they've never given content a thought apart from their own yoga classes and sequencing?
Right. Okay. So in terms of which avenues to pursue, I think I agree with you, what you briefly said, which is start with what you feel the most comfortable with and what you think you will be able to do on a consistent basis. So if you like writing blog posts and and that's a comfort zone for you, start there. If you feel more comfortable speaking, just doing a quick outline, right, of what you're going to say and then doing a video, start there. But I do think that it's worthwhile to consistently create some of this, what I call like deeper content, right? Like either a blog or a vlog, because then you can promote that in many different ways and you can repurpose that. So you can tease it on your social media channels and send people to your website. And when they go to your website, they might click on your schedule and see your offerings, or they might click on your bio and get to know you better. You can put it in your newsletter so that the people who have subscribed to get updates from you have a new interesting piece of content to read from you every month. So I suggest, like in the course that I do, I suggest that people have a newsletter, one sort of bigger quote unquote piece of content every month, like a blog or a vlog or a podcast if you want to go there, although I don't cover podcasting in the course, and then one or two social media channels. There are so many options for social media channels, and I think that if you spread yourself too thin, even the repurposing kind of loses its vibrancy. So pick a social media channel that you feel comfortable with. I feel comfortable with Instagram and Facebook and also Pinterest. I tried Twitter, and you know what? I'm just not pithy enough for Twitter. I think people are like brilliant on Twitter, to be quite honest.
I'm not on Twitter, so it's lost on me.
There's so many funny, pithy people and angry people on Twitter. But that's just not my wheelhouse. So I gave that up a long time ago. And so pick the ones that feel most comfortable to you, invest some time in those. And then if after a few months they're like, this one's not working for me, like Twitter wasn't working for me, you can just sort of slowly back away. But I do think it's good to have that kind of 3-prong approach of having a newsletter, having some new content that you're creating every month, and then having a social media channel or two, if you can handle that, where you promote everything.
Mm-hmm. So you're taking the approach of new piece of content once a month?
That's where I ask people to start, because I know that for some people it just can feel really daunting. And I think that consistency is more important in the long run than starting off once a week and then fizzling out after 6 weeks.
You can always add more, but it's like you start a lot and then you're not able to finish it in 3 weeks. And
you want to feel like you want to get some feeling of accomplishment and success rather than feeling like you're behind the ball. So you want it to be something that you enjoy doing, or you're not going to keep doing it, right? So I think starting out once a month is pretty reasonable, and it will still, especially like with blogging and vlogging, you have to think of it as a long-term investment in your SEO, right? In your search engine optimization, so that by depositing those pieces of content, right, in an optimized way, you will show up more consistently in searches. And we have sequences that we did 7 years ago that still show up pretty high in searches and still deliver, new audience members to our website every month. So you have to think of that long tail.
I agree. And I think we're like stuck in this phase of like instant gratification, and we want to see instant likes and instant messages, but it takes time. And even I notice after like 7 years of the studio being open, the website just kind of fuels itself in some way.
Oh, that's good. That's great, Aru.
So I think it's really important what you bring up. I wanted to talk about email list building, because you mentioned it earlier, and I was waiting to ask you. Now, what should someone know about an email list? Like, I know yoga teachers who've never given an email list a second thought. And I think a lot of teachers are spending a lot of effort on social media, but I mean, we don't own that platform nor those followers, right? And we can lose them literally overnight, and our accounts can disappear overnight. So what would you say someone should know about if they've never thought of an email list? Where do they begin, and what should they do?
Yeah. Well, you and I are in exact alignment with this. It is the drum that I beat the loudest with my students, which is, if you're going to do anything, start an email newsletter and start it yesterday. Because, like you said, we have no control over what social media platforms are going to do. We have no control as to whether they're going to get acquired, as to whether they're going to go under completely, or, God forbid, you get banned. like another very popular person, not popular, but you know what I'm saying.
I know, yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, and whereas with your email list, it is your list and you get to communicate with them directly. The other thing to think about with your email list is, there's a difference between people who want to sign up to hear from you directly and sort of engage in that relationship. There's a difference between those people and people who are randomly find you on social media. Some of the people who find you on social media are engaged people with your content, but some might follow you for a month, 2 months, 3 months, 8 months, and really never go any deeper with you than that. So when you're like, think about someone signing up to have you delivered to their inbox, however often you want it to be delivered. That's a really powerful step in a relationship. So, and you get to control completely like the messaging with that person, and it's very direct. So the other thing to keep in mind is that I think that sometimes I often will hear from people like, well, I already get too many emails. I don't want to contribute to spam, or I don't know if I really have anything important to say. Okay, if you're teaching yoga, you definitely have something to say. And if you are not yet writing new blog posts every month, or if you haven't gotten your video platform up, et cetera, you can still take things from your classes that you're planning in the upcoming week and share them with your students. You can still, if you have a moment of insight during one of your classes, you can still kind of jot, after class, like do a voice note about that little moment of insight, and then write a paragraph or two to just inspire people in your newsletter. So in terms of, I just think a lot of it is fear for people. I think a lot of it is fear. And a lot of it is that social media is just flashier and kind of more exciting, and we see each other. So there's like some FOMO. But when you get down to the real statistics of email newsletters, and I actually jotted them down because I knew I would be talking about this today, you kind of can't beat the statistics. So I have here, by the end of 2019, 5.6 billion people were projected to have email accounts.
Oh, wow.
More than 50% of US respondents check their email up to 10 times a day. And it is their preferred way to receive updates from businesses. And then lastly, the most opened emails relate to hobbies. So with an open rate of 27.3, whereas the average for all industries is 21%. And I'll tell you, if 27.3 or 21 sounds low to you, it's going to be a lot lower in social media with the algorithms in terms of how many of your followers view most of your content. So all of those things just kind of lend themselves to starting this really important connection with your students and your audience.
I want to go back to a couple of things you said. Firstly, I love those stats. Thank you for sharing those with us. And I know you say 27.5 sounds low, but I've been looking at email stats on my newsletter, and that's pretty high.
It is high. It is high. Yes.
And I think fitness and wellness industries in general, they have like slightly higher open rates because people are trying to look for these options in general. But there's something that you mentioned in passing about building a relationship with our audience. And I think that is such an important aspect just to pause on and to talk about it. We forget that somebody who's opening that email, not only can they be a customer and buy a course, but they could potentially be a lifelong investor in our business, quite literally. Because once they do a beginner series, then they move on to something else. And if they're doing teacher trainings, they'll come back for mini trainings. So I think while social media is flashy, like you said, it's so important to build that rapport. And I think that's where sometimes teachers just forget to invest in that relationship, and it takes time.
Absolutely. I completely, I mean, I think it's easy to forget when you see, these huge numbers on social media, these huge numbers of followers that people have, and like, oh, I need to have that many followers. But if it's not a real relationship, it's not actually that valuable. So like you said, it's really worth thinking of each person who follows you or each person who is subscribed to your newsletter as a person who you are having a conversation with, in hopes that you're helping them and that they're interested in what you have to offer. It's really worth thinking of it that way. And it also will just make you feel better about what you're doing, because doing things on the internet can feel like, let's face it, it can feel a little bit disconnected, because it is. But if you really, anybody who comments on my posts, after a while, like, I know their handle, I look at who they are, I try to remember them, because if they're interested enough that they're going to comment, I want to see who they are. I want to see who's interested in what I'm saying, what I'm putting out there.
I want to ask you about teachers who are employed at studios versus people who just teach independently, like, say, for me, for example. Now, it's pretty straightforward for me to build an email list because I'm reaching out to these people and they're joining me. But what about teachers who are employed at a studio? I'm guessing there's stuff they have to keep in mind, right? Like, you can't take information from your students if you're teaching at a studio.
Well, I would just talk to your studio head before you promoted anything like that. I know that when Jason used to teach remotely, like if he would go to, let's say, Cleveland or something and teach a workshop, he was allowed to, he would discuss it with them beforehand, and he was allowed to say, if you want to get notes from this session and you're interested in being on my mailing list, and he would just leave his laptop at the front of the room, and people could just write their name and their email down like in a Word doc, and we would just import them that way for a really long time. So I think the answer to that is it really depends on who you're working with. If you're approaching your studio about it, I would just encourage them and say, I will obviously put my schedule for these classes in every newsletter. I recommend that people put their schedule somewhere in every newsletter. And so it should be a win-win for the studio to allow you to have a newsletter and to talk about it, even if you can't directly collect the emails at the end of every class, but just to let people know you can go to my website and find out when I'm teaching anytime if you sign up for my newsletter.
You mentioned adding the schedule in every newsletter. Anything else specifically that you think people should add in a newsletter?
Yeah, I mean, again, I like to keep it really simple for people just starting out. And so I like to think in threes. So my recommendation is to just include one piece of original content. So whether that is, as I said, like a paragraph or two with an insight from your class, or a paragraph or two breaking down a pose or something that you're working on in the coming week or coming months in your class. Or it could be a link to a blog post or a vlog or a podcast. So one piece of original content, your schedule of online and in-person classes, and then a call to action. So the call to action is just giving them something to do. So whether it's like, and the way you figure out this call to action is to ask yourself, what do I want them to do from here, right? They've read the newsletter. What do I want them to do? And if it's that you have a new blog post or a new vlog, that's what you want them to do. You want to click on that. You want them to click on that. So that's your call to action. But if you don't have a piece of content elsewhere that you're sending them to, you could give them one of your social media platforms. You could send them to a sales page for one of your upcoming courses. You could include a list of 5 articles that you read this week that might be interesting to them. So you're just giving them another step in the process of engaging with you and directing their attention.
So valuable. And actually it's I like that you're saying you want to keep it simple for everybody who's starting off, because sometimes I think everyone, like a lot of yoga teachers, they try to do too much at once instead of just taking one step at a time. And sometimes people in trainings are like, oh, but I have to learn this and I have to do that. And I'm like, no, you start here. 3 months later, then you once you've done this for 3 months, then you move to next thing, and then build your confidence along the way. Because otherwise, everybody's sitting and dealing with imposter syndrome, while being a yoga teacher. So I have another kind of strange question. Now, what kind of yoga teachers should be creating this content? I mean, does every yoga teacher out there need to be in heavy duty content creation?
I would say 99% of the time, the answer to that question is yes. Unless you just have some really niche word of mouth private teaching business. And even in that case, I still think it could be helpful to your students, to your private students, to offer them, some kind of recap of what you're interested in right now, what you're learning, what you'd like for them to learn. But, very rarely do I have a student who I say, well, you might not need any to do any online content. There was one student who said that she really just doesn't think, and she lived in a rural area and a small town, and she wasn't interested in really growing her student base, and said that she didn't feel like her students were online. And so, in that case, I guess you could make the case that it's not necessary, but I don't know. I know how hard it is to make a living as a yoga teacher. And so I think that you have to use all the tools in your toolkit. And I think creating content is a really powerful tool. So I really do believe that if this is what you want to do with your life, that you've got to look at content as something that can support you in that. Jason started writing for Yoga Journal. I want to say I started working there in 2002. He was teaching there, and that helped him segue into writing. And so I want to say he started writing in about 2004. So that was just such a great learning experience for him, and such a doorway into what content can do for you and your growth, and then also for your visibility. And think about that. How long ago was that? 17 years ago. Right? A long time ago. But what he learned from that experience, and that's something we haven't quite talked about yet, but content can be just a great tool for fueling your own growth and learning to articulate your teaching values and your approach and your philosophy. So from that perspective, it can just be incredibly helpful. Anytime you have to teach something or write about something or create something, you're going to learn more about that topic. And as teachers, that's the name of the game, right? That's what's going to keep you fresh and engaged. And that's what's going to keep your students engaged with you. Yeah. So I think content is for everyone. I do.
And it makes you a better communicator, right? And everything in our yoga industry is about how we communicate, whether it's through our body, our words, or some other form. We're constantly communicating. So I think it's really important that you bring that up. Side note, right? A lot of teachers probably haven't paid attention to the fact that when you write for these magazines or online websites, you could potentially get paid for every article you contribute.
Yes, that's really true. And there are more outlets like that now. So, I actually don't have a running list in my head, but obviously, Yoga Journal has a big online presence. Yoga International is still there. And then all of the like Elephant Journal, I actually don't know if Elephant pays. I don't know if all of them pay, but like you said, if you have some ideas and you really feel like you have a series of ideas, you could always go to their website and figure out how to pitch your ideas to someone. And then, like you said, get paid and then get the visibility of those eyeballs, those readers seeing your name and your content.
Mm-hmm. It's Yoga International pays. I've not written for Yoga Journal, so I don't know, but I don't think Elephant Journal pays.
Yeah, I don't think they do either. Yeah.
It's pretty clear on their website if you go and look for like submissions. But I think the thing we're not talking about is you've actually got to put out great content to get in the first place. And that takes a lot of time and energy and effort and occasionally disappointments. So what would you say are certain personality traits or characteristics yoga teachers need to have to be able to generate content?
I think that that's a really good question. I mean, the thing that comes to mind for me immediately upon you saying that, and we've touched on this a little bit already, but is just persistence and taking the long view. Because like you said, you won't necessarily see, like, unless you create something that goes viral. And again, that is not my area of expertise because I've never done that. But unless you create something that goes viral, you're not going to see immediately like a gigantic change in your life. You're going to learn. It's going to be trial and error. And so I think you have to really take the long view and have a sense of persistence and a sense of resilience, right? That you might not get the result you want right away in terms of billions of more followers or 2,000 more signups to your email list, but if you commit to the idea that it's a growth process and that it will help you grow internally and grow your business as a teacher, that then sticking with it, I think, is really one of the most important qualities. And just kind of in a really basic way, following, getting to know the data side. So following the stats. So like I say this, and in terms of following analytics, it can feel a little bit overwhelming. Like if you look at Google Analytics these days, they're adding so much so quickly that there's even things that I don't look at because I don't know how to look at them. But really just looking at on the top level, which kinds of things do I post that people that get a lot of likes, that people comment on a lot, that people are really interested in, and which things bombed. And it's okay if they bomb. Like everybody has a bomb. It's really not a big deal. Which newsletters do people open the most? What were the subject lines for those newsletters? And then which newsletters did they click the link for? Did they click through on that blog post? So if you just look at those really top level numbers, you'll get a lot of data, which can then help you with your trial and effort of creating content. I'm trying to think of other personality traits. I think another thing to tap into for yourself is a sense of creativity. So I often hear from students like, oh, I'm not creative. I had a student who said this, who I'm now friends with. She is the most creative person I know. She had an Etsy shop. She makes phenomenal Halloween costumes for her kids. She can sew. She just made a candle holder, all these things. And yet she told me she wasn't creative. So we see ourselves so differently from what our potential actually is. And so when I say tap into your creativity, it's kind of looking for ideas, or I should say taking note of ideas when you least expect it. my best ideas come right as I'm falling asleep or when I'm in the shower.
In the shower. Oh,
yes.
Okay, there we go.
Oh, when I'm in the shower, or, after a meditation or after a long walk. So I don't mean sit down and force yourself to I'm going to be creative now, but take note of when you feel inspired and really cultivate that in your everyday life so that you're noticing things and then you can create content and it can be more fun for you. I also do think you can kind of set the stage for your own creativity I do recommend this in my course, by carving out some time every week, whether it's an hour or two, where you're just going to create and, make your favorite cup of tea or favorite cup of coffee and make your space really clean and nice and devote that time to free writing and thinking and looking at others for inspiration or expanding on the ideas that you've written down during the week.
I like that you say, it's like you're saying, make a ritual out of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And build consistency with that. And creativity will come if you set yourself up for it. I couldn't agree more. I want to go back to something you were saying about newsletters and statistics. And it's yoga teachers don't realize that, this is the non-glamorous, it's the unsexy parts of yoga that we have to do. But I'm curious as to what newsletter software do you use? Are you on Kartra right now?
Yes. Yeah, we're on Kartra. We switched over to Kartra at the beginning of 2020. And it was a great thing for us because we didn't know the pandemic was coming. So we didn't know we would be moving all of Jason's content online, but it's been an incredible all-in-one solution. Do you want me to talk a little bit about?
Yes, please. And is there anything else you've used? Because I want the listeners to know that there are free email softwares that they can start with, and then there are paid stuff. So sure, go ahead.
Yeah. So, we were on MailChimp for many years and it was fine. And I think if you are happy with MailChimp, then by all means, I don't recommend that people switch unless they really see a need. I found that when I wanted to start tagging our different students and sort of segmenting our lists, that MailChimp was confusing to me. And it wasn't very intuitive for me when I wanted to do the more advanced things. So when I looked to switch to Kartra, and the reason I switched to Kartra is because it's really an all-in-one solution. So it is a platform where you can create your courses and house your courses there. You create your newsletter and your mailing list there. And then you also have your shopping cart there. So instead of having 3 pieces of software that have to communicate with each other, it's all in one. And so I really I just didn't want to get into having to use things to connect the different softwares. I wanted it to be really easy for me. Another one that does that does that well, that I have students who have had success with it, is Kajabi. I feel like there is one other all-in-one solution, but I'm blanking on it. But if you're not quite there yet, the other platforms that I looked at are ConvertKit. And I think people really love ConvertKit, and it's very user-friendly. I like that. When I went to use it, I did a trial, and I really liked that the owner of the company does the little tutorial videos. So it's just like, you feel like you know the owner. Yeah, it's very personal and they're very easy to understand. And I really liked that. And then another one that I've gotten kind of mixed reviews on, but I thought about choosing it, was Flowdesk. Have you heard of Flowdesk?
I've heard of Flowdesk. In fact, my husband has I'm on MailChimp.
Okay.
And I've been looking to move out of MailChimp's paid account. Their taggings and stuff have gotten a lot better. I think I would say around summer this year, they really upped their game a little bit. But 2021, I want to shift out of it. And Flowdesk is on the list, and so is not Constant Contact, ConvertKit.
So if you're going to join Flowdesk, what I will now recommend to people is that they join the Flowdesk Facebook group, because I joined that group and I've seen lately more and more complaints on that group to the owners, and the owners monitor it. So they are listening to the feedback, and I don't know how quickly they're updating. But the thing that I love about Flowdesk is it's so beautiful, and I love design.
I love it.
It's so beautiful. They just have so many beautiful templates, and they do have all of the they have the tagging and they have sequences. So they have all the automations that you would need, and it's pretty inexpensive. When I first was recommending it, it was like $17 a month or something like that.
That's it.
I'm sure it's gone up. That was when they first launched. So I'm sure it's gone up, but I would think that it's still a pretty low price point. So, and the thing that's interesting is that Flowdesk is so beautiful, but it's a newer company, so they're kind of working out the kinks. ConvertKit is not as beautiful. The guy who owns it even says he does not think that you should put a lot of graphics in your newsletters. He thinks, it's not that important for conversions, et cetera, et cetera. He's very data driven.
I'm very visual.
But I like the visuals, and I think if you want to put the visuals in your newsletter, you should be able to. So they kind of come at it from different angles. Now, there are so many other options out there. Those are just the ones that I'm most familiar with right now. I know a lot of people use ActiveCampaign as well, and they like ActiveCampaign.
Oh, okay. I haven't heard of that one. How important is it for yoga teachers to seek outside industry help? Like sometimes we're so dependent on yoga teacher trainings to teach us everything, right? But it's like you go to yoga school and then you quite literally have to go to business school in some way, for lack of a better word. So how important do you think it is for yoga teachers to invest time, energy, effort, and money in these additional trainings?
That's a really good question. I think that if you want to look into potentially doing a training with someone, I would recommend listening to their podcast first. Most of the sort of big name marketing people, the ones that come to mind for me are like Seth Godin, Amy Porterfield.
My favorite.
I love her too. I have learned so much over the years from her free podcast.
I agree. And
she's amazing.
And I went to her San Diego event in 2019, I think. Yeah.
I've never done anything paid with her, which I feel kind of guilty about saying that out loud. But that's, like you said, it's like just when you listen to their podcast for free, you can, I'm sure Marie Forleo has one. You learn so much about them and their approach and their just the way that they teach and the things that they teach. And so if you did want to then commit to a program with them, you would have a lot of background first. Some of them, I mean, to be honest, I think some of them are really expensive for our industry. Yeah. And that's actually part of why I created my course. I was like, I'm not going to charge $1,600 for this, whereas marketing experts are a little bit more, they're working with corporate people more often, right? So they tend to be a little bit higher priced. But you could always also, like what I did, I have not taken very many courses, but I did do years ago a really reasonably priced funnels course with Mariah Cause. Because I was like, what's a funnel? I don't know what a funnel is.
I'm embarrassed to admit, I learned what funnels are, I think about a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago.
Same here. I think I did too. It's just not in our
repertoire,
in our reality. Yeah, exactly. It's just not there. So I really needed to understand what is this thing that people are talking about. And it was like a $97 course. And it was just walked through, this is what an email funnel is. This is what a webinar funnel is. This is how you could do it. And that helped me a lot. And then free podcasts helped me a lot. And so you have to just piece together what is reasonable financially for you, and then what's going to push your business forward. So I think you really need, if you're going to make an investment, you really need to be ready to utilize what you learn in that course. First of all, to finish the course, and then you have to be ready, like to utilize what you learn in that course so that you can get the money back with expanding your business. I'm very practical,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of this is just yoga teachers, right? There's no real structure for us there are no steps to follow. You chart your own path. And I think that's where sometimes people get a little off path. Like, of course, do I do this or do I do that? And then I tried this for 2 months. Now I tried this for 2 weeks, and we end up being all over the place. I've been there all over the place. So really important. I wanted to ask you, Andrea, anything you wish you knew at the start of your, say, podcast journey or content creation journey?
I wish I had known how hard it would be to monetize, to be quite honest, because having an editorial and publishing background, I just thought, okay, I'm going to break free of this freelance writing life. And I'm going to take everything I've learned and all the people I know in the industry, and I'm going to interview them, and I'm going to grow a big audience, and I will be able to make a living doing this on my own. And that just really wasn't the case. And granted, I've worked part-time for the past 7 to 8 years since my daughter was born, because my husband traveled so much. So I really had to be like the primary home parent. So I've never worked more than like 15 to 20 hours a week on the podcast. But I still would not say that it makes me a part-time salary even now. And in fact, this year, 2021, is the first year I'm going to go without sponsors, because I just felt like it wasn't financially super beneficial compared to like the audience experience and my own experience of creating the ads. It's actually quite time consuming to do the ad reads. And so I'm setting myself free of that. And I'm really excited about that. So I'm, I think just knowing that ahead of time, if I had known like this isn't going to be a way to make an income, it can be a way to supplement an income, and it can be a way to drive students to our paid offerings. That is what I wish I had known, because that is a great way to utilize podcasts in terms of, supporting your business. And I think the other thing to know, and I feel like I actually did know this ahead of time, is that it can be an incredibly inspiring part of your work life. So I essentially took my favorite part of being an editor at Yoga Journal, which was talking to the teachers who contributed to the magazine, and I turned that into, what I was doing all the time. So talking to people that inspire you, that uplift you, that have amazing knowledge to offer it's just a great way to spend your time.
And I completely agree.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you enjoying the podcast that you are working so hard at creating?
I am. I would say I still get a little nervous every now and then as to like, what am I doing? But if I can compare myself to like 5.5 months ago when I actually started this, I think I've gotten better at it, but it takes so much time. It feels like a full-time job. Apart from the studio, the rest of my days are spent figuring things out for the podcasting. And especially if you're doing research and reading books and interviewing authors, I mean, it takes a lot of time. I'm glad you bring up the monetization of the podcast, because a lot of people think, like YouTubers who have millions of subscribers and who get paid for every ad click and stuff like that. It's very different in the podcasting world. And I remember months ago when I had first connected with you, you had mentioned that you don't want to spend too much time on sponsors because it's way too much effort and not enough return. I think it'll be surprising for the listeners to actually hear the behind the scenes of what happens in the podcasting world.
I was thinking that too, that people might think differently, because like you said, it does take a lot of time and a lot of effort. I guess when I say I've only worked 15, 20 hours a week, I haven't thought about all the reading outside of it and all the, it's like I've finally kind of gotten better about prioritizing and compartmentalizing a little bit. But even though I was only hands-on working, editing, interviewing, booking, promoting for 15, 20 hours a week, I was never not thinking about it for about 4 years. It's just always thinking about it and ruminating on possible people, possible ideas. Like you said, doing all of the reading. So I think people might assume that once you get to a certain level, it's a little bit more lucrative.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to talk to you about, like creating your own content and do it for a few years, and eventually you can, maybe not years, but you can monetize it slowly if we do every single aspect of it. So yeah, just before we wrap up, Andrea, anything else that you think the listeners need to know about content creation, or have we pretty much covered it all?
Yeah, I just would add to piggyback on what you just said, be really intentional about creating your content. So So when you think about free versus paid, try not to think of them as separate, but try to think of it as an ecosystem, right? Where the free content that you're creating, you are creating to support your paid offerings. And whether that's direct messages of promoting things, or whether it's content that establishes your expertise or that piques people's interest, that gives them a little bit of taste of what they're going to get from a paid offering. Really just be intentional about where you want to spend your time and effort, and then you'll get something out of it.
I agree. And it's why spend your energy on doing multiple things when you can streamline everything and do it under one niche or one umbrella. So no, that's really powerful. Do you want to give people an example of something like that, Andrea? Like I'm thinking of a masterclass I did for a training, but any examples that come to your mind?
Yeah. So I'm trying to think of a direct,
we can make one
Stephanie
up.
Snyder.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll actually just use Stephanie Snyder. So she owns Love Story Yoga in San Francisco, which is a studio where Jason teaches. And she's been teaching for a long time in the Bay Area. And Steph just loves yoga philosophy, and she loves teaching yoga philosophy. But if you were a student going to her weekly class, right, her weekly vinyasa class, you would only get a tiny taste of that, right? Because you can't go deeply into yoga philosophy in a 90-minute class. So Steph does longer workshops or series immersions, having to do with philosophy. And so all of the content, not all, but a lot of the content that she creates on her social platforms is different ways that she unpacks yoga philosophy. So, she might talk about, and it's actually really hard to give an example because yoga philosophy can be kind of esoteric to describe, but, she'll do posts that are very personal, right? And let's say in terms of how she applies yoga philosophy to her life. And so if you're just interested in those kind of posts, or you're interested in how do I apply yoga philosophy to my life, you can start following her. And then over time, you'll get to know kind of how she views things and how she applies things and which texts she's the most interested in. And then let's say once a quarter, when she does an immersion and she promotes it, it just makes sense with everything else that she's been writing about and talking about.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Is that helpful?
That's very helpful, because then this person's on your mind all the time for this particular thing.
Exactly.
And then it's just easier to take your credit card and pay for something. No, that's a great example. This has been really wonderful. Is your content creation course coming up? I know you release it only, once or twice a year?
Yeah, so I released it for the first time last year, and I am working on kind of getting it to be a self-directed course, a self-guided course, because I think that it really is possible to do it in a self-guided format with just a few live Q&A calls with me. So if people are interested in learning more about it, they can go to jasonyoga.com/content blueprint.
I'll make sure to link that.
Okay,
in the show notes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Take care.
Thank you. It was great to talk to you. Thanks so much.
You too. Say hi to Jason for me.
I will.
Thanks for listening. As always, please remember to rate, review, subscribe to the Let's Talk Yoga podcast. And it means the world when you share it with your fellow yoga buddies. I'll see you next week with a brand new episode. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.